You know, this is a great organization, and the first thing they do, they say Ox is too brutal to be on TV. But they can't stop me from going to these house shows. They cannot stop me trying to get that $100,000. Now, I've got this heart punch. 2 men in wrestling have died from this punch, and I can tell you, for $100,000, I can take this Jap with that chop of his and this heart punch, and I can promise you 100,000 big ones. I'm going to knock down a few people, and if they try to get up, I'm going to kick them right in the face. My opponent, they carried him to the dressing room after I knocked him down. He was crying and moaning. He wanted someone to touch his body. And I said, don't worry, fella. You wrestled the best there is, the fantastic Ox Baker. You know, 20 years ago, this man here knocked me down and said, Ox, you're going to have to learn. So I got this heart punch, and for 20 years, I've been knocking people down. And I've been enjoying every minute of it.
Before the age of pyro, entrance music, and WWE-branded ice cream, wrestling villains didn't need corporate polish to make audiences tremble. They just needed a wild look, a deadly move, and the ability to make you believe they meant every word they growled into a microphone. In this golden age of territory wrestling, when larger-than-life personas ruled smoky arenas and cable TV was still a novelty, few figures were as immediately terrifying or as wildly captivating as Ox Baker. With his bald head, fearsome handlebar mustache, and bug-eyed glare, Baker looked less like a wrestler and more like a comic book supervillain brought to life. With a reputation for literally killing opponents, and a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of some wrestling hell, he wasn't just a heel. He was a horror movie on 2 legs. Douglas A. Baker was born in 1934 in Sedalia, Missouri. Nicknamed Ox as an insult when he was a kid, Baker was an accomplished football player and wrestler in high school. But like many men of his size and demeanor, pro wrestling found him. Originally hired to put up the ring, Baker quickly realized at 6 feet 5 inches and weighing over 300 pounds, he was much larger than the wrestlers he was helping. Ox Baker didn't step into the ring until 1964, just after turning 30, an unusually late start in a business where most wrestlers begin their careers in their early 20s, if not younger. But what he lacked in experience, he made up for in sheer presence. Baker had the kind of physical presence that needed no microphone to be intimidating, but he amplified that image with an iconic look. In 1971, another wrestler named Lord Jonathan Boyd suggested that because of his size and deep voice, he should do something unique with his look. Baker decided to have a shaved head, long, bushy mustache, pointy eyebrows, and a crazed glint in his eye. He looked like a cartoon villain come to life, a man you'd expect to see menacing a hero in a B-movie, which he eventually did, but we will get to that later. Baker later recalled that the first time he came out with this look, someone gasped and shouted, "That's the devil!" Every great wrestling heel has a signature move, and Baker's was the heart punch. As simple as it sounds, the move was loaded with drama and danger. It was a modified strike to the chest that, in the world of kayfabe, had the power to stop a man's heart. And in a macabre twist, that myth took on real-life consequences. On June 13, 1971, Ox Baker teamed with the Claw in a tag match against Alberto Torres and Cowboy Bob Ellis in Nebraska. What happened that night has been debated ever since. Some accounts suggest Torres entered the ring already suffering from a ruptured pancreas. Others claim he sustained an injury mid-match, compounded by an undiagnosed heart condition. Whatever the case, the outcome was grim. Torres collapsed during the match and died just days later in an Omaha hospital at the age of 37. Promoters, weirdly enough, used this tragedy to their advantage and claimed that the evil Ox Baker killed his opponent with the heart punch. Just over a year later, on August 1, 1972, tragedy struck again. Ray Gunkel, a beloved babyface and part owner of the NWA Georgia Territory, collapsed and died shortly after a rematch with Ox Baker. medical reports pointed to a condition involving hardened arteries as the primary cause, with some speculation that a large greasy meal earlier that day may have contributed to the heart trauma. Still, to fans and promoters alike, the common denominator was clear. Ox Baker had now been involved in 2 in-ring deaths. The legend of the heart punch was no longer just a gimmick, it was feared. Baker became the man who could kill with a punch, a storyline villain so lethal that the crowd's hatred for him felt more like fear. Audiences believed it. Some rioted, others fled arenas. Baker caused chaos wherever he went, but later said, "I love it when people throw things at me. It means I've done my job." And in a time when wrestling heels were measured by how many fans wanted to stab them in the parking lot, Ox Baker was doing a very good job. But sometimes, Baker might have done too good of a job. If there was ever a single moment that captured just how much fear and fury Ox Baker could inspire, it was the riot that erupted during his feud with Ernie Ladd in Cleveland on January 31st, 1974. The big cat Ernie Ladd, already a towering figure in the sport, was one of the few men who could physically match Ox Baker. But in the eyes of fans, Ladd wasn't just a big man, he was their man. And Ox was the devil trying to take him out. Originally, Baker was supposed to quickly run in to interfere in a match between Ladd and Johnny Powers, and then leave the ring quickly. However, Baker and Powers began to beat down Ladd to get heat from the crowd. Ladd refused to go down, and Ox Baker pummeled him with heart punches to the chest. Baker later claimed he continued because Ladd wouldn't stay down. Allegedly, Ladd in the ring told Baker to stop because, quote, "the natives are getting restless." Fans genuinely believed Ladd was going to be killed in the ring. The atmosphere turned from excitement to sheer panic and rage. Dozens of spectators rushed toward the ring. Incensed by what they had just witnessed, the fans turned their fury on Ox Baker, Johnny Powers, and nearly anyone else who dared set foot in the ring. Chairs flew. Debris rained down. The ring became a war zone as the crowd erupted into a full-blown riot. Surrounded on all sides, the wrestlers found themselves with no clear path to the safety of the locker rooms, trapped, vulnerable, and forced to ride out the chaos they had unwittingly unleashed. It's hard to overstate the importance of kayfabe during that time. Wrestling wasn't seen as sports entertainment, it was real to the audience. And Ox Baker, with 2 supposed in-ring deaths already attached to his name, had convinced them he was more than just a heel. He was dangerous. When he dropped Ernie Ladd, the crowd didn't see it as a storyline. They saw a man's life being stolen in front of them. What makes the moment so iconic is that it wasn't manufactured in the way modern wrestling angles are. There was no social media to hype it, no camera crew ready to turn it into a documentary. It was pure, unfiltered emotion, a reminder of how wrestling, at its best, can blur the line between fiction and reality so well that people literally stormed the ring to protect a hero. But it wasn't just the heart punch that made Ox Baker who he was. Part of Baker's charm, and terror, was his promo work. His interviews weren't the slick, catchphrase-laden rants of today's superstars. They were snarling, unpredictable, often delivered with wide eyes and exaggerated menace. His deep, gravelly voice would rumble as he promised to destroy opponents, fans, or even entire towns. He wasn't just selling a match, he was selling a nightmare. What made Baker so effective was that he never seemed like he was acting. He fully embodied his character, the way horror actors like Vincent Price or Christopher Lee committed to their gothic roles. This skill would help transcend Baker into Hollywood. Ox Baker's unique look and personality helped land him roles in movies and documentaries. Most notably, he appeared in John Carpenter's Escape from New York in 1981, in which he plays a feral gladiator battling Kurt Russell's Snake Plissken. The scene is brief but unforgettable. Ox's appearance, so perfectly suited to Carpenter's dystopian landscape that it feels like he was born for the role. Baker also made a surprise appearance when he was lucky enough to be picked for the very popular game show, The Price is Right. At the sight of the huge wrestler, host Bob Barker said, "Douglas, I sure hope you're in a good mood today." Off-screen and outside the ring, Baker was known to be a kind and often humorous man, the opposite of his in-ring persona. After wrestling, Baker dedicated his life to cooking. Ox Baker proudly claimed he sold 3,000 copies of his cookbook entitled Ox Baker's Cookbook, a tribute to the fallen warriors. It contains recipes for his 50 favorite dishes, intertwined with tributes to many wrestlers. Baker also trained young wrestlers, made appearances at fan conventions, and always claimed he never met a fan or wrestler he didn't like. Sadly, Ox Baker passed away on October 20th, 2014, at the age of 80 in Hartford, Connecticut. The cause of death was complications from a heart attack, which adds a strangely poetic and eerie into the life of a man who built his entire wrestling persona around the idea of a deadly heart punch. In a modern wrestling world filled with choreographed flips, reality TV backstories, and corporate polish, there's something refreshingly raw about Ox Baker. He was pure gimmick, an old-school monster heel who didn't need fancy entrances or social media followers to sell tickets. He just needed a ring, a microphone, and the promise that someone's heart might stop beating before the night was over. Ox Baker was never meant to be a hero. He didn't win world titles, headline WrestleManias, or become a merchandising empire, but he understood what wrestling was at its core, theater for the working class, where good and evil collided under a haze of cigarette smoke and cheap beer, and as one of wrestling's most committed villains, Baker played his part to perfection. Ox Baker was more than a wrestler. He was a force of fear, myth, and muscle. His legacy lives where it always struck hardest, right in the heart.